Okay. Lovely. Well, thanks for joining and thanks for having me. Um, we've put together a shortened version of one of our courses that's quite a popular course. So this one is challenging your worrying thoughts. There we go. Have I got the right one? Yes. Okay. So our courses are usually about sort of we have 2 hours, 15 minutes, 15 minutes for a break. Um, but yeah, we've done a little bite-sized one just to kind of show you the sort of thing that we do. Um, so does anyone know or want to guess the answer to this? How many thoughts do we have each day? Feel free to use a chat or raise your hand or shout, whichever you want to. Any ideas? Over 1,000? Okay. Any
Million. I'm not
sorry,
sure how many, but millions, I would think.
millions? Okay. 1 million we've got. Let me open the chat as well.
My first thought was about 500.
Okay, 500. So we've got over 1,000, a million, 500, 6,000. My brain never seems to switch off. Everything's at 100 miles an hour. I definitely relate to that. And I think no one knows. Okay, so the answer we've got is 6,200 per day. So I think someone said pretty close to that. So that obviously this is on average. So it was previously thought it was sort of a lot more than that, but recent research in 2020 revealed that it's about 6,200 thoughts a day. So that's about 4 thoughts per minute on average. Obviously, this can fluctuate, different people, different situations. But if we start thinking about kind of the subject of today being challenging our worrying thoughts, if you think how many of those thoughts might be quite unhelpful and challenging, then that ends up being quite a lot throughout the day, and even just by the time you've got to work, a lot of those thoughts could have been quite unhelpful. So it's good to kind of know how to manage that and how to recognize them. So as I say, today is a mini version of our Challenging Our Worrying Thoughts course. My name is Catherine Melia, so I work for the RCE Wellbeing Hub within CPFT. So we do lots of different sessions around mental health and wellbeing. I've been there since January as one of their peer tutors. So yeah, let's get going. So our session objectives. So today we're going to explore how our thoughts can dominate our thinking and affect our behaviours. We'll explain the difference between challenging and unhooking, and just introduce acceptance commitment therapy, or ACT, principles to provide helpful strategies and techniques to help us to unhook from unhelpful thoughts. So the first thing is just have a look at these pictures and have a think about what kind of worrier are you. So like the tortoise, do you kind of put your head down and retreat a little bit? Are you a busy bee? Do you stay busy and kind of maybe distract yourself and avoid problems? Do you panic? Kind of like word vomit everything out and verbalize it all? The bit of a sort of passive aggressive, like I'm honestly fine, just not really verbalizing things fully. Do you get frustrated with yourself, maybe, or other people, or maybe you're a bit standoffish and want to keep people at arm's length? And again, similar to sort of just dealing with it by yourself. Do any of those kind of resonate, or any of the pictures? Yeah, so it might be a combination of a few or all of them potentially, for sure. I know I'm 100% a busy bee. I just stay out and about, keep myself busy at work. Yeah, another one who's a bit of all of them. I think it can depend on the situation sometimes, and just how we're feeling. Oh, ostrich, I like that one. Yeah, head in the sand, kind of again like avoiding it, just pretending it's not happening. I like that. Anyone else? Panic and get frustrated. Yeah, frustration, I think, is quite a big one. I think you don't really know how to handle something, so it just comes out in a whole different way. That's quite common. Yeah. So yeah, there are lots of different ways. Letting things build up inside, then get frustrated. Yeah, sometimes like a pot boiling over, everything just like even with sort of lots of minor worries. If you think about how many thoughts, 6,200 thoughts a day, even if those are lots of little things, fairly minor things, that all adds up over a day to actually something that can affect us in quite a negative way. So yeah, so these are just some of the common trends, but obviously there's lots of different ways we can sort of worry and how we cope with that. And sometimes it can feel a bit like sort of mental boxing, almost fighting with ourselves a little bit, and it is quite exhausting to go through that. So obviously we've said about throughout the day, things will potentially build up. You might be sort of hiding a little bit, you might be taking out on others around you or yourself in some way. But if you think about not just the thoughts and mentally how that affects you, but any ideas how worries can affect our bodies as well? So physically, how that can affect your body. I don't know if anyone's seen or read or heard of the book The Body Keeps Score, or Body Knows the Score. I can't remember what it is, but that's about how even quite sort of minor day-to-day stress can have quite a big impact on the body physically. Yeah, so you have anxiety and get chest pains from worrying. Chest pains definitely a common one. And yeah, that's a good point. So if you have a pre-existing condition like chronic fatigue, for example, it can definitely get worse and worse. So I have endometriosis, and I know when I'm stressed or I've pushed myself too far, I start to get the pains or pains in my legs and all sorts of stuff. So yeah, definitely it can worsen symptoms. Muscle aches, definitely. We've carried tension in quite surprising places sometimes, a lot of the time in our necks. And obviously I think we probably all know from potentially working from home, our backs carry a lot of tension as well. Yeah, got tensions there. Palpitations and tiredness, really good. Yeah, just that like heart rate going up and with that kind of stress. And yeah, I mean, definitely tiredness. It's exhausting, isn't it? Worrying all the time. And yet triggered by stress. So yeah, you might have it preconditioned, but you can also really build up to having something triggered by stress. Yeah, the book I haven't read it, but I have heard very good things about it, and it is one. It's definitely on my to read list, because I think a lot of people don't realize just how much it can affect the body. And actually, doing things like being mindful and kind of doing these things, I think a lot of people feel like, it won't help because my worries don't go away. And no, they don't. But just sort of managing some of your thoughts and just having that little bit of a break from them can really impact on your physical symptoms, I guess, of stress. Yeah, sorry. So I'll type it in the chat. So it's the body. I believe it's Keep Score. Just need to remind myself who it's by. It is. I'm not gonna. Yeah, Bessel van der something. I believe that's it. But yeah, yeah, if you want to have a look at that, that's a really good book. Okay, lovely. So I mentioned in the session objectives about kind of looking at what unhooking means and how we can use that. So a lot of the time we assume if we have a worrying thought, we have to challenge it, we have to kind of sort it out and do something about it or feel bad about it. Something needs to happen. That's not always the case. So challenging troubling thoughts involves using our logical mind to tackle the thought. So we might look for evidence or look at the problem from a different angle. You know, we're really trying to kind of problem solve that thought. So for instance, if it's a thought about work, you think, right, okay, so in order to solve this worrying thought, this problem I'm having, this is what I need to do to solve it. If it's a thought about yourself, then that can be a lot harder and therefore a lot more challenging for people. Whereas when we unhook a thought, so this involves allowing our observing self to recognize the thoughts as they pass without making judgment and without getting emotionally entangled with them. So sometimes this can be visualized as you kind of have a thought and you sort of pretend it's like a balloon and it just sort of drifts away. So you're not kind of putting any emotion or really real feeling or importance onto that thought. You're just recognizing that you have the thought. So that is quite a common technique with different forms of therapy and mindfulness, to just kind of allow ourselves to recognize that we're going to have the thought, because human minds are going to think about everything. It's very hard for us to say, I'm just not going to think about that. But actually, it's then what we put onto that thought that causes us the worry a lot of the time. So, like I said, you know, thoughts are just, they're always going to happen. But thoughts really, I mean, they're not necessarily real. You know, thoughts are built from somewhere, but they're not necessarily the real situation. They're simply words or images in our brains. They're not tangible. They're not real things in themselves. You know, we can kind of watch them go past like a train, but we don't have to get onto them. We don't have to get on board. We can just watch them go past and not kind of really do anything with that thought. And, you know, I say this like it's easy. It's obviously easier said than done, like a lot of things. But with practice, it is possible. And it is possible to just try and kind of move on from a thought and not get too emotionally involved. So it's quite a good one for when challenging doesn't work. So if it is a thought that is maybe potentially irrational or illogical, or a really challenging kind of intrusive thought, maybe it's not always kind of possible to challenge it, because actually there's not really anything you can do about that, especially at that time. So actually having another approach can really help. So we have a look at, and obviously in our longer course we go into a bit more detail. So we have a look at ACT, so acceptance commitment theory. So it's a little bit like kind of CBT type stuff, but it's not a typical type of therapy. So it kind of gives us a bit of a toolkit and encourages us to handle painful thoughts and feelings, but while sort of building a bit more of a meaningful life. And it kind of stems a lot from acceptance, clues in the name. And it does take a lot of practice, but it encourages us to just accept our thoughts and feelings. It encourages us to choose a valued direction of our thoughts and our life. You know, what's meaningful for us? Where do we find value? And then it encourages us to take action where appropriate. So it encourages us to be more in the present moment and sort of consciously connecting with whatever's happening now. So we talk a lot about in mindfulness of being present, taking notice of what's going on, and kind of seeing the physical world around us. But it also like helps us recognize our internal world, so how we're feeling in our bodies, how we're feeling in our minds, and kind of helps us with a bit of acceptance for that. So similarly to unhooking, it's about sort of detaching from our thoughts. So we step back, you know, we make room for those potentially painful feelings and challenging thoughts. But actually where ACT comes in is it's dropping that struggle. So it's dropping the mental boxing, and it just gives them space. It gives your mind space to have those thoughts, but with the unhooking, not necessarily feel the emotion towards those thoughts. So it can be especially helpful with persistent thoughts and worries that we may struggle to challenge. So like I said, obviously we have some thoughts that are quite easy to challenge. You know, you come into work and you're stressed, or I haven't replied to that email and I needed to, and okay, that's fairly easy because that's rectifiable. But if you're having a potentially persistent thought that maybe doesn't have an obvious solution, or is potentially due to more like low self-esteem or other challenges you're having, then this can really help just give us that little bit of distance and detachment from our thoughts, so that we are able to work on the root cause rather than just going in a cycle of worrying about our thoughts. So we have a couple of unhooking exercises, which obviously you're welcome to try if you want to. So this one is you have a thought and you name it, and that kind of tames it. So this is the principle of that kind of distancing yourself from the thought. So we're not making a judgment whether the thought is true. We're just noticing it and accepting it. And it's just sort of allowing the thought to be. It just diffuses our thought from our minds. So this can help with kind of the idea of you have a thinking self and an observing self, and this really is a practice of getting into your observing self mind. So if you have a thought saying I'm not good enough, you know, you go out and you say, okay, I'm having the thought that I'm not good enough, and then further from that you say, I notice that I'm having the thought that I'm not good enough, and it just takes that little bit of the power out of it. So if you have a similar recurring thought, again, I think this is quite a good one for sort of recurring persistent thoughts, because it takes a little bit of power out of it. It takes the truth out of it, because like I said, thoughts are just words and images in our minds. They don't have to be real. It's us that puts that power onto them. So yeah, so that can be a good one. When I taught this session before, someone took it very literally and literally named the thought like a human name. So they said that they were having a Jerry thought. And I just said, well, you know what, if that's what works, I think I like it, because it takes even more of the power out of it. So if you're feeling like, oh, I'm just not good enough today, the way of unhooking is just thinking, oh, I'm having that thought about Jerry. And it just, you know, it just takes that harshness out of it, I guess. So yeah, so that's quite a nice one. Another one we've got is about writing down the thought. So it should be one that's unhelpful and that you've maybe named. So for example, I'm a bad parent. So I'm having the thought that I'm a bad parent, and I've noticed that. And then you can think of a simple song and just sing the thought. I'm not going to sing, don't worry, to example this, but it can kind of lose the power. I mean, you're all on mute, so if you want to do it, I won't know. And that can just kind of, again, it's about taking the power out of that thought and distancing and detaching yourself. You know, it loses its strength as you sing it, and it just becomes a series of words, a series of letters without that meaning. And it reduces its impact quite a lot. There's a similar one to this where you can write down the thought and do it all in different colours, different fonts, and kind of get really creative. And again, especially if it's quite a persistent ongoing thought, this can help, because it just dumbs it down and stops it feeling overwhelming, I guess. Yeah, so this one is, use the example of Happy Birthday, but obviously any song, it can be as silly as you want, and that can just be a really nice way to take the power out. So again, I spoke a little bit about the visuals of unhooking. So if it helps, if you're a visual person, you know, you can really kind of use this to observe your thoughts and allow them to float away. So they can be a balloon in the sky, they can be a leaf floating down the river, or they can just be anything. I mean, trying to think what I use. I usually do the balloon in the sky, or like a basket on the river, or just something that you know will kind of float away from you. And it sounds potentially silly and it sounds like quite a long process, but actually once you start practicing that, it's all kind of changing your habits and changing your habits about how you think and what your thoughts are. And that can often help quite a lot, just again to take the power out and to detach yourself. So it's that kind of mishmash of a bit of the act theory and unhooking your thoughts, because you are accepting them, you're noticing that they're there, and I think it would be wrong to try and just ignore the thoughts, and just say, oh, they'll go away. But actually, if you kind of accept them and change them in some way, whether that's singing them, whether that's writing that down, whether it's calling them Jerry, whether it's watching them float away, just changing that thought in some way can help. So we talk a lot about kind of connection at the Hub. It's one of the 5 ways to well-being. So it involves kind of steering the observing self to notice the present and connecting to the present. So we do a lot of things on autopilot. For example, I'm sure you drive on autopilot if it's a journey you know really well. You come home, you put the kettle on, probably on autopilot. All these things that we do, we don't really notice, we don't think about them, they just sort of happen. I know I've done many journeys where I've got home and just completely forgotten. Like, I don't know how I got myself home, but you just do things out of habit. So connecting to kind of the present moment, it does take a lot of practice, and it involves your senses, and it's quite an active thing to do. And you have things like mindful eating, and different sensory exercises. But it just improves our connectedness to the world around us. And we can do things, just simple things. So if you do the washing up on autopilot, you can do it mindfully. You can feel like how the water feels on your hands. You can smell the washing up liquid. You can feel the different textures of what you're washing. You can hear the kind of bubbles and hear it all splashing into the sink. There are ways of doing anything mindfully, and actually connecting to what's around us is part of that act therapy model, where it's almost giving us that little bit of respite and just stepping back from our thoughts so that we have that little bit of distance from them. So that can really help as well. And we do a course on mindfulness, and we do some different techniques. So we do a mindful eating with a raisin. Be surprised how long you can take to eat a raisin. And yeah, we do various different things on that. And I think connection can obviously mean to people, but we look at it in terms of this kind of context as connection to what's around us, connection to the present moment. And mindfulness doesn't have to just be sitting for hours meditating. It can be really small things that really keep us kind of grounded. So the last kind of way we can help ourselves is journaling. I think it's got very popular nowadays. There's loads of different ways to journal, but it is a really useful technique because, again, it's taking that thought and it's putting it somewhere else. So you're taking it out of your head. And again, if you're a visual person, this can be a really lovely visual way to do it. And I quite like this picture, this example, because they've really kind of decorated all those thoughts, and they've written things in kind of leaves, and it's a really nice example of it can look however you need it to look. Journaling doesn't just have to be writing a long diary every night. It's kind of whatever you feel. And we have a course again on kind of words and well-being, so how writing can help your well-being. And I really like this one because I think if you struggle to kind of visualize thoughts like with the balloons and floating down the river and things like that, then it can be really hard to distance yourself. But I find that writing things down and seeing the thought somewhere else just makes it feel a lot smaller. It helps it feel a lot less daunting. Okay, so So we always have takeaway messages at the end just to kind of leave you with some of the main thoughts. So the main ones are that thoughts are not real, so we don't have to wrestle with them. You know, we can unhook our minds from our thoughts. We need to use our observing self to make room for troubling thoughts. So this is what we call expansion. So just giving them the room, giving ourselves the room to have those thoughts. And we need to connect mindfully to the external world, so the connection. So we've had a look at unhooking, we've looked at expansion and connection, and those are the three kind of key areas where you can really help your worrying thoughts. So there's a few resources, different books that talk a bit more about mindfulness and happiness trap, compassionate mind, and it's just that kind of, again, allowing yourself and coming back to the acceptance that we will have these thoughts and that that's okay, but actually we can make them smaller and we can take the power out of them. So if you are kind of Cambridgeshire, Peterborough area, and you feel like you've enjoyed this, I know it's been very quick and I feel like I've talked forever, but we do have loads and loads of different courses. I've mentioned a couple. We've just got our new timetable out, so feel free to have a look on our website or just drop us an email address if you'd like to be emailed a timetable to have a look. All the blurbs are in there for all our courses. And yeah, are there any questions? Either on the hub or the course, and I'll see if I can answer. No. Cool. Okay. Well, thank you for coming along.